All right, moving on. This one, this is where it gets tough. Let's see how we're doing for time. Hollywood celebrates, promulgates, and promotes child sacrifice. Hollywood celebrates abortion. Let's look at Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 12. Thus I will do unto this place, saith the Lord, and to the inhabitants thereof, and even make this city as Tophet, or Tophet. I talked about this a little bit last night with Pastor Flip. And what happened is the Israelites were about to be taken into captivity. They were about to go into Babylon. And the Lord was literally warning them through the prophet Jeremiah of the Levitical command to not pass your seed through the fires of Moloch. So I asked myself, could Jeremiah 19:12 also apply to Hollywood? Now, I don't want to take the scripture out of context, but I think it poses an interesting question. I think so, and I think Hollywood thinks so. We used this on the Hagman and Hagman report on December 21st of last year. Sorry for the graphic content, folks, but this is the way it is. This is what Hollywood does. It's what Hollywood celebrates. It's what Hollywood promotes. And you have to sort of step outside that pre-programming that we're all victims of and look at that picture and think to yourself, how is this even happening? What is going on with our country? What is going on with primetime network television that not only is this acceptable, but it's promoted, it's celebrated? With films like Mel Gibson's Apocalypto and The Believers and Farrah Fawcett in Small Sacrifices from a few decades ago. Rosemary's Baby. I'm not going to go into a long thing right now about Rosemary's Baby, but Rosemary's Baby was directed by Roman Polanski. You may remember Roman Polanski, whose wife Sharon Tate was slaughtered by the Manson family. He is currently in exile from the Department of Justice living in France because if he ever comes back to the United States, he will be brought up on charges for sodomizing a 14-year-old girl in a hot tub. He doesn't even deny that he did it. He just, well, I'm not going to repeat what he said, but anyway, Polanski's a criminal. He made this film. It was a huge box office success. It starred Mia Farrow, and it celebrates the idea of bringing about a child of Lucifer. And I want to take a moment here to touch on something that I talked about on the Hagmans, and I've talked about it on Caravan to Midnight as well. And talking about this sucks, straight up. I was aware of this in conjecture and sort of by rumor in Hollywood for a number of years, but I started to really investigate it seriously about 18, maybe 20 months ago. And what my investigative efforts turned up actually brought me onto some pretty difficult phone calls with Doug Hagman. I knew that they were going to bring me on the show to start talking about Hollywood. We did our first effort back on, I think it was February 14th or 17th of last year, where I came on and I talked about kid shows primarily, and we'll talk about those here in a minute. But what happened was I had to actually have a couple conversations with Doug where I stated, look, I'm going to talk about these things, and I need to make sure this meets your S&P requirements for the Hagman and Hagman report. I was very nervous to bring this information to you folks. And it's nothing short of this. It's called Baby Breeders. And this is how it works, you know, as fictionalized in Rosemary's Baby. Paul McGuire has a very interesting insight into this as well. He talks about the story of Jack Parsons in the 1960s and their efforts in Pasadena to bring about these Luciferian children for future sacrifice. So you want to go back into the Hagman archives and listen to what Paul has to say about it as well. But this is what happens. Hollywood will determine that they're going to make a big $200 to $300 million picture. Now, Hollywood has not self-financed film going back probably, I would say, to the late 60s, early 70s. Right around the time Robert Evans was running Paramount, you know, the Gulf Western Transamerica days. Feature film production, especially after the big Fox disaster of Cleopatra, was getting so expensive, they realized they could no longer self-finance their projects. So what they did was they started to enter into these relationships with some of the large international banks, you know, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Credit Suisse, etc., to finance the pictures. And sometimes they'll bring 2 or 3 of these banks in you know, sort of financial collaboration. But a $300 million picture can make or break certainly a production company and to some degree even a studio. And so what happens is the heads of the studios, many of the independent producers who are very well moneyed and have a number of successful films under their belts, they, going all the way back to the beginning of Hollywood, and if you're interested in hearing about how Hollywood got started, by the way, check out the Hagman and Hagman report from, I think it's June 24th, or it might be June 25th of last year. I went into a lot of detail on that show. We did a full 3-hour show, and I talked about how Hollywood was created and how it got its name, et cetera. For expediency's sake today, I can't go into it, but from the beginning, Hollywood has had a very strong Luciferian agenda and a Kabbalist and Jewish mysticism and numerological approach to much of what they do. And going all the way back to the time that I just read about, where the Israelites were disobeying the law is laid down in Leviticus to not sacrifice their children. They're about to be taken into captivity in Babylon. Also looking at the ancient Canaanites and their sacrifices to Moloch. On occasion, Hollywood is doing the same thing, and this is how they do it. In this country, what's colloquially termed the Illuminati, they don't call themselves that. They call themselves initiates. Sometimes you'll hear them call themselves priests or witches. Priests is more common. They have this country divided up geographically, much the same way the military does. Okay, and each geographic area is controlled by, as Ephesians 6 verses 12 and 13 tells us, we war not with flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. So there is a demonic component to the control of a given geography, but in the terrestrial definition, there's also a human control, and that's typically a high priest or a warlock that controls a number of multi-generational families of witches. Now, if you're interested in this stuff, you definitely want to go back into the Hagman archives and listen to some of the stuff from 2012 and 13 with Doc Marquis. He came out of one of those families, and he has some excellent insight into what I'm talking about. Back to Hollywood. Here's how it works. There's a big picture that's going into pre-production. $200–300 million, okay? This thing's a make it or break it type thing, and they need to do a blood sacrifice, the type of blood sacrifice that Aleister Crowley wrote about in the late 40s. So they need a sacrificial child. This is where baby breeders come in. They will contact a multi-generational family, practitioners of witchcraft, and they will find a family that's got a 12 or 13-year-old daughter, and they'll pull her out of school. They typically use the excuse that they're moving somewhere. Unfortunately, they have medical doctors and all kinds of medical professionals that help them do this. Witchcraft is pervasive even in some of the upper echelons of our different professionals. And what they do is they pull this girl out of school and they connect her to they connect her with a warlock that they'll fly in from anywhere all over the world. And he will begin to copulate with the minor right under the supervision of her parents. And once she has become pregnant, they sequester her in the home until she carries the baby to term. Then a Wicca midwife will come in and actually deliver the baby. So what happens is you have this innocent life that has no paper trail, no birth certificate, no social security number, no proof with any type of authorities that it exists. And they take a lesson from the ancient Canaanites here. Let me advance these slides a little bit. They will actually sacrifice the child, and the way they do it is this. I'm pretty sure I've been to one of the sites in Malibu. It's very hard to get information out of people firsthand about this stuff. But I did talk to a Wicca in the high desert about a year ago when I was doing the research for the original Hagman and Hagman report, the one that I mentioned from June. And she explained to me in part how it works. They have smaller statues of Moloch. And what they do is they heat the statue up red hot. Now, the Canaanites had like a throat abdomen area that would open up, and they would throw the young children into this statue of Moloch. And they would do it all day long until several hundred bodies were thrown into this abdominal cavity where the fats and the tissues would burn, and it would make this incredible red glow that would enable them to engage in orgiastic dancing, ritual, and rite, typically for either atonement of their sins or to ensure the fertility of their crops. for the upcoming growing season. Now, this is again in ancient Canaan. Well, Hollywood does a similar thing. They heat up a smaller statue of Moloch, and then what they'll do is they'll take this infant, this child, typically, just a couple of months old or younger. They prefer boys, but they use girls too. And they'll take the little innocent life and they throw it onto this red-hot statue where it immolates, and they believe that this gives them favor with Satan, And, I've thought about this a lot, and I'm probably not going to talk about this for very much longer because it bugs me every time I do. But basically what they do is they take a little innocent baby and they throw it on a big skillet where it fries, so that we can go down to our multiplex and buy a big bucket of popcorn and a big soda and sit down and watch the big $300 million action feature. It doesn't happen every day, but it does happen.